Male isolation rarely begins as loneliness. It usually begins as relief. There is a phase when many men quietly reduce contact. Conversations shorten. Social exposure becomes selective. Emotional availability narrows, not as an act of withdrawal, but as a recalibration. Less noise, less friction, fewer situations that demand explanation or interpretation. From the outside, this shift can resemble detachment. Internally, it often feels like order. The man who isolates is not always overwhelmed. In many cases, he is functioning. His routine stabilizes. Decisions become faster. Emotional variables decrease. The environment feels easier to manage when fewer people are involved in it. This pattern appears gradually. There is no dramatic break, no visible collapse, just a slow reduction of depth in interactions. Relationships remain, but they flatten. Contact continues, but without exposure. What disappears is not presence, but vulnerability. At this stage, isolation is not emotional. It is structural. It organizes life around predictability. It minimizes situations where expectations are unclear or where emotional responses must be negotiated. It creates a private mental space where outcomes feel controllable. That is why this pattern is rarely questioned early on. There is no immediate pain signaling danger. There is often the opposite. A sense of calm replaces friction. Silence replaces ambiguity. Distance replaces obligation. Many men learn over time that engagement carries a cost, that speaking openly introduces misunderstandings, that emotional availability can be misread or exploited, that closeness often demands a kind of responsiveness that feels destabilizing. Isolation emerges as a solution, a clean one, quiet, efficient. It does not announce itself as avoidance, it presents itself as maturity. The reduction of contact feels intentional, rational, even responsible. There is no language of loss attached to it yet, only the language of optimization. Fewer inputs, fewer disruptions, more internal coherence. At this point, nothing seems broken, nothing feels missing. The structure works, and structures that work are rarely examined. This is how the pattern establishes itself, not through pain, but through relief. What sustains this pattern is not fear, it is reward. Isolation continues because it delivers something tangible, emotional efficiency. When fewer people are involved, fewer reactions must be managed. There is less interpretation, less negotiation, less need to explain internal states that are difficult to translate. The nervous system adapts quickly to this simplicity. Social interaction, especially at depth, is metabolically expensive. It requires attention, empathy, timing, calibration. Isolation removes those demands. The mind experiences this as relief, and the body encodes it as safety. This is where the pattern stops being situational and becomes reinforced. The man is no longer isolating because of a specific disappointment or conflict. He is isolating because the internal environment feels better when he does. Calm replaces unpredictability. Control replaces exposure. Over time, the absence of emotional friction becomes addictive. Not because connection is unwanted, but because connection now feels inefficient. It introduces variables that disrupt an internal equilibrium that took effort to build. Engagement begins to feel like regression. The reward is subtle but consistent. Fewer misunderstandings, fewer emotional swings, fewer moments of self-doubt triggered by external feedback. What replaces them is a sense of internal sovereignty. This is where misinterpretation happens. From the outside, it looks like confidence, independence, self-mastery. The man appears unaffected by social dynamics. He seems centered, focused, unbothered. But internally, something else is forming. The nervous system begins to associate closeness with cost, not danger, cost, energy loss, cognitive load, emotional taxation. The absence of connection becomes the default baseline. At this stage, the man does not feel lonely, he feels efficient, and efficiency is difficult to argue against. There is no immediate consequence from maintaining distance. Life continues, work progresses, days pass without friction. The structure proves itself daily. This is why advice fails here. Telling someone in this state to open up feels irrational. Why would they voluntarily reintroduce complexity when the current system functions so smoothly? The reward loop is complete. Isolation now serves a purpose, and anything that serves a purpose becomes defended. The pattern no longer protects from pain, it protects the structure itself. This is the point where isolation stops being a response and becomes an identity-adjacent behavior, quietly integrated, rarely questioned, and increasingly difficult to interrupt. The cost of this pattern does not appear as suffering. It appears as narrowing. Nothing collapses, nothing breaks. Life simply loses dimensionality. Because isolation removes emotional volatility, it also removes emotional contrast. Experiences become flatter, not negative, just compressed. The highs soften, the lows stabilize. Everything moves toward the center. This feels sustainable for a while. The first signal is not loneliness, it is reduced resonance. Moments that should land do not fully register. Achievements feel clean but incomplete. Conversations feel efficient but hollow. There is less internal echo after events end. The nervous system adapts again. By avoiding exposure, it also avoids stimulation that forces growth. Emotional range contracts, not dramatically, but incrementally. Expression becomes more controlled. Curiosity about others weakens. The impulse to share fades. This is not depression, it is emotional underuse, like a muscle that is not injured, only unused. Over time, the man notices a subtle shift. Connection now feels awkward, not threatening. The internal systems for intimacy have not failed, they have simply gone idle. This creates a paradox. The more isolation stabilizes life, the harder engagement becomes, not because it is painful, but because it feels foreign. The emotional bandwidth required feels excessive compared to the return. And yet, something is missing. Not consciously, structurally. Humans regulate themselves through relational feedback. Without it, self-perception becomes self-referential. The internal narrative loops without external calibration. Certainty increases, but accuracy slowly degrades. The man feels solid, but less permeable, strong, but less adaptive. This is the hidden cost, reduced flexibility. When life eventually demands adaptation, loss, change, pressure, the narrowed system has fewer pathways to respond. What once felt like control becomes fragility under stress. Still, there is no clear pain to point to, only a quiet sense that life has become smaller. And because nothing is overtly wrong, the pattern remains untouched. The cost is paid not in suffering, but in potential. The critical moment is not when isolation hurts. It is when it stops evolving. Patterns that protect eventually begin to limit, not because they are wrong, but because they are outdated. What once stabilized now restricts range. The decision is subtle. It is not, do I want connection? It is, am I willing to tolerate expansion again? Expansion requires exposure. Exposure reintroduces unpredictability. Emotional input increases. Internal control decreases slightly. The system becomes more complex. This is why the shift does not begin with action.
It begins with permission. Permission to experience friction without immediately resolving it. Permission to let interactions be inefficient. Permission to feel misunderstood without withdrawing. The goal is not openness, it is responsiveness. A flexible system does not abandon structure, it adds bandwidth. Re-engagement does not mean reversing isolation entirely. It means selectively allowing depth where it matters, letting certain interactions bypass efficiency filters, allowing a few relationships to be emotionally real, not optimized. This feels destabilizing at first. The nervous system interprets it as loss of control. But what is actually happening is recalibration. Dormant pathways reactivate. Emotional range returns unevenly, then gradually stabilizes. The man does not become less grounded, he becomes more dimensional. This is the real trade-off. Isolation offers stability without growth. Connection offers growth with volatility. Neither is inherently wrong, but staying indefinitely in the first guarantees stagnation. The question is not whether isolation protected you. It did. The question is whether you are still living inside a structure designed for an earlier version of yourself. At some point, protection becomes inertia, and the moment you recognize that, quietly, without drama, that is the moment the pattern loosens. Not because you force it, but because you no longer need it to survive.